morning. Today's scripture reading comes from 1 John 4, verses 7 to 8. Beloved, let us love one another, for love is from God, and whoever loves has been born of God and knows God. Anyone who does not love does not know God, because God is love. This is the word of the Lord.
All right. When are the college people coming back? I asked because I sent off both of my boys to school. I drove to Penn State yesterday, and made the trip back in 8 hours. So, yes, kind of drive fast. Last week we started a new sermon series, and it's a sermon series focused on building our community together, that we would truly be a community where our relationships become really meaningful and genuine, and that it would go deeper. So last Sunday I talked about how we need to love one another deeply. And this was a question I asked you guys. In all the meaningful, genuine, passionate, important relationships that you have in your life, how many of those relationships are found in the church community that you belong to? How many meaningful, passionate, deep, loving relationships do you have with the brothers and sisters in the church? Because this is what we are called to do, right? Peter says, above all else. Above all else means this is the most important thing, right? This is the most important thing, that we love one another deeply, earnestly. And so it's not just about someone that you connected with, and he's my friend from high school, and we go way. No, it's talking about your brothers and sisters in Jesus Christ. And in the same manner that you are called to love, you should also have a genuine yearning to be loved in the same manner, right? And this is how the community of God is going to be built. And in the passage that we read today, 1 John chapter 4, 7 and 8, John says, you are beloved. You are those whom God has chosen to love. So he says, beloved, let us love one another. Right? And that's the title of this message. Let's love one another. For love is from God, and whoever loves has been born of God and knows God. Anyone who does not love does not know God, because God is love. John says the very essence of God, very nature of God is love. And Jesus made it also very clear. He says the two most important things in the Bible, if you want me to summarize it, are these two things. That you love God with everything you are and everything you got, and that you love your neighbor as yourself. But I want you to kind of look at the second commandment and how Jesus says it. Right? He said this in Matthew chapter 22. Verse 37, it starts out, and he said to him, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. And this is the great and first commandment. But then second commandment, he introduces it like this. And a second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. What does Jesus mean when he says second is like it? It means it has the same importance, same value as the first commandment. It's not less. Some of us, if you were to answer the question, do you love God? How much do you love God? There's no hesitation. I love God with all my heart. God is my number one priority. I would sacrifice anything for God. I would do anything He would call me to do. I am a willing vessel. I love God. But the real question is this, as Jesus puts it, but do you love your neighbors with the same intensity as you say when you confess your love for God? Because Jesus says, hey, love your God with all you are and all you have, first commandment. And second commandment is just like it, just as important. You should love your neighbors. You should love your neighbors. Jesus is making it very clear that loving God and loving your neighbor are not separate things. They're not separate commands. Like it's not like I will choose one and not choose the other. No, if you love God, then you will love your neighbors. And if you kind of take a look at it from a different perspective, you could even say that the way we treat others reflects how deeply we love God. So then that kind of puts us in a conundrum, right? Because if I were to ask you, like, on a scale of 1 to 10, like, rate yourself, how much do you love God? 10 being highest. And I don't know, you would give yourself 8, 9, 10. But if your love for God is reflected only through how much you love your neighbor, where would you end up on that scale of 1 to 10? In how much you love your neighbor. If that is what measure we used to determine how deeply you love God, a lot of us will struggle in hitting even 5. Because we tend to think loving God, of course, with everything I got. But loving our neighbors, it depends. It depends on who they are, what they do to me or don't do to me, how they treat me, and all these things. But John introduces to us this powerful concept that love comes from God. It doesn't come from within us, but it comes from God. That means the love that we have to love one another is not determined by how we are treated by them. That we think our love to our neighbors should be a response to how they treat me. Right? I have a neighbor right next door to where I live. He's a foreman. He's a super. And every time I walk by, he says hi to me. He talks to me about weather. He helps me, when I'm carrying stuff. Nice guy. And when you have people like that, you're like, oh yeah, he's cool. He's a cool cat. I like him. I appreciate him. But if the person is not nice to you, is rude to you, is aggressive towards you, and because of ABC, I don't like him. I will not love him. See, the main problem in our struggle in loving our neighbors is because we think our love for them is based on how they treat us. But John says, no, love is from God. It comes from God. And God is love. And, we're going to talk about this because John goes on to really explain that when God loved us, we had no reason for God to show us such love, show us such kindness, show us such grace. I mean, that is the very definition of grace, right? Receiving something that we don't deserve. But the very nature is God. That's the very, God's very nature is love, and his very essence is love. And so when that love comes to us, he enables us to love in the way that he loved us. And so that we need to understand how this love came to us. And in Romans chapter 5, verse 6, Paul talks about it like this. He says, "For while we were still weak, at the right time, Christ died for the ungodly. For one will scarcely die for a righteous person, though perhaps for a good person one would dare even to die. But God shows his love for us in that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us." We have this idea that somehow through who we are, through what we have accomplished or what we have accrued in our lives, we deserve certain love, we deserve certain respect. And when that gets broken, sometimes we even walk away from certain relationships saying, "I don't deserve your love. I don't deserve to be loved." Remember Jesus' parable about the prodigal son. What was he saying in his heart after squandering all his father's wealth, after offending him greatly, cursing him, and taking his share? And he was starving to death. And he said to himself, "This is what I'm going to say to my father." Right? And what did he say? He said, "I don't deserve to be called your son. I don't deserve your love." So we tend to think that when we don't deserve something, then we dare not expect it. And in the same way, if the other party does not deserve something from me, then they should not expect it. But see, that's because we don't understand how we came to be loved by God. Biggest mistake is this. We think we were loved by God because there was some good in us. Despite all our failures and despite our sinfulness, we think there was something that we must have done that is deserving of God's love. If you guys are a fan of Sound of Music, Julie Andrews sings that song. You know, in my youthful childhood, I must have done something good. I must have done something good, or else how do I explain this great love that I'm receiving? Right? And while it sounds precious and beautiful, I want you to know that is the ultimate opposite understanding of what grace is. God doesn't love you because you did something good. God doesn't love us because you did something that is deserving of his grace and his mercy and his forgiveness. No. Paul makes it very clear, right? Romans 5, verse 8. God shows his love for us in that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. We were still sinners. We're actively sinning against God. We're actively rebelling against God. We were the enemies of God. And this is when he chose to love us. This is when he chose to forgive us. This is when he chose to show us mercy. This is when he chose to send his son, Jesus Christ, to die for us. As a matter of fact, in choosing to forgive us, he sent his son, Jesus Christ, as the propitiation, as the sacrificial lamb to pay for the penalties of our sin. This very act cleared the way. It connected the chasm which separated men from God because of our sin. And Jesus became that bridge. Jesus became that way by which we are able to enter into the presence of God. That is why Jesus says, "I am the way, the truth, and the life, and no one comes to the Father except through me." And so what John is saying is, if you experience the genuine love of God, and if you truly understand the magnitude of his love, how you were undeserving, yet he chose to love you, he chose to forgive you, he chose to pay for the penalty of your sin at his great loss. And this love is coming to you from God, then it is only natural for this love that you now have to flow out of you into your relationship with other people. This is the exact parable that Jesus talked about, right? These two servants owed money. One guy owed multiple lifetimes worth of debt to his king. He could live his life 100 times over, but he would never make enough money to pay for his debt to the king. And king forgave him the debt. Complete grace, complete mercy. But then his friend owed him few months worth of wages to him. And he said, please give me some time, please forgive me, I'll make it right. He didn't listen, he threw him in jail, right? And the king was furious. He says, you should have learned from my kindness, through my forgiveness, that you ought to also forgive your brother. Even though his debt was forgiven, he didn't really understand the love or the grace that was behind this forgiveness. And brothers and sisters, when we talk about our relationships, we can talk about how our relationships are complicated and it is difficult, because we can be offended, we can be disappointed, we can be hurt. But it comes from this angle where I need to be treated fairly, and if the person treats me fairly, then I will also treat the person fairly. But see, God's idea of loving one another is, no, as the person is offending you, can you forgive? As a person is disappointing you, can you seek reconciliation? Right? I saw a little short, one of those short reel things, on Instagram. Pastor Richard from Church of Southland Chino, and I thought it was like really good how he put it. He says, he goes on to explain what pride is, right? And he says, you know what pride is? He says, pride is when you're easily offended. Pride is when you're easily hurt, when you're easily angered. And I really agree with that, because when you do that, when you're easily offended, easily hurt, easily disappointed, you're coming from this place of elevation. Like, you should not talk to me like that. You should not treat me like that. You can't say that. And we are living in a society where we are so easily offended. So easily offended. Because we don't realize how prideful we have gotten. On the other hand, he goes on to explain, but what is being humble then? The opposite of a humble person is this. Even though you're offended, you seek forgiveness. Even though you are hurt, you seek reconciliation. Even though you're disappointed, you pray through, you overcome, and you reconcile. That's a sign of a mature Christian who is loving. You can give me 1,000 reasons why you're hurt and why you're disappointed, and I empathize with you because I feel the same pain. But if we allow those things to break down our relationships and cause us to drift apart, what would we become? What would we become? No, these relationships that we have in our lives, your relationship with your spouse, with your parents, with your children, with your friends, with your coworkers, with your church members, these are precious relationships. Relationships are precious. And that is why God seeks to reconcile them. God doesn't want you to take relationships so lightly and say, you know what, this one's not working out, so I'll replace it with something else. I'm going to replace this relationship with something else. That's not how God works. God says, no, I am going to pay dearly to not only keep, but to restore this relationship. Think about it. If God were to do creation 2.0, wipe us off the face of the earth and make us in such a way so that we're not sinful and we're in love with God, He could do that. I'm sure that He can do that. But what is all this that is going on? Sending His Son and having Him suffer on the cross and humiliated, crucified and dying and resurrecting and being with us and leading us and being patient. What is He doing? He is restoring the relationships because they're precious. We are precious to Him. That is why He doesn't want to say, wipe them off and give me batch number 2. You don't throw away relationships. Tomorrow is my 24th year anniversary with my wife. Right? But she'll be in Cali, so I'm bitter. But think about it. How many times do you think I fought with my wife? More times than I like to count or admit. What if every time I had a fight with my wife, I'm like, I'm going to get wife number 2. I would be up to wife number 27 by now. No. It was painful. It was hard. And sometimes it was humiliating. Sometimes it was infuriating. But we struggled together. We struggled to forgive. We struggled to understand. We struggled to reconcile because my relationship with my wife is not replaceable. It's a relationship I made in a covenant before God. It's precious. Don't take your relationship with your friends, your coworkers, with your family members. Don't take them lightly. They're very precious. And if you're easily offended, easily angered, easily hurt, you're coming from a place of pride. What God is calling us to do is overcome that through forgiveness. Overcome that through reconciliation. Overcome that through prayer and through faith. Through long suffering. Allow God to work through you and work in you. That is the sign of a genuine, mature Christian who is learning to love one another. And as I talk about, loving one another, I just want to talk about a couple ways, practically, where we can really start to love one another deeply. And the first thing I would like us to recognize is that I am a sinner. And even though I did not deserve to be forgiven, God forgave me. And in the same way, do not wait for the person to be deserving of your forgiveness. But be the first to love and be the first to forgive. Sometimes we confuse between forgiveness and reconciliation. And sometimes we refuse to forgive because you think you're refusing the act of forgiveness, but what you're actually seeking at that moment is reconciliation. But I want you to know reconciliation is step 2, it's not step 1. In order for reconciliation to take place, you need to do step 1, which is forgiveness. Let me explain. Forgiveness between two people, it only takes one person. Forgiveness, you just have to decide, I'm going to forgive you. It doesn't matter whether the person acknowledges his sin or wrongdoing or not. It doesn't matter if the person is sorry for what they did or not. You just choose to forgive. Some of us, we have had broken relationships. And then sometimes people come to me, Pastor Joe, like, I was really angry with my dad. But before I had a chance to reconcile with my dad, he passed away. And now what do? I can't even forgive him because he's gone. And I tell them, no, forgiveness is your decision. Your dad may not be here, but you can choose to forgive him now. And you can be set free from that burden of hating your father. You can choose to forgive, whether the person is deserving of your forgiveness or not, whether the person is even cognizant of what they did to you or not. And after you have decided to forgive, and as you pray and as you work on your relationship, reconciliation, step 2, that takes acknowledgement from both parties. The wrongdoing person has to acknowledge, yeah, I did that to you, didn't I? Yes, I stole from you, and yes, I hurt you, and I'm sorry. Then the reconciliation can take place. But I will not force reconciliation on you if the other person is not admitting their wrongdoing. See, that's pushing down legalism on you. You're a bad Christian if you don't reconcile. No, we don't do that. You can always choose to forgive, but reconciliation takes both parties. So what I'm saying is this. Recognize that person who has hurt you, disappointed you, offended you, rubbed you the wrong way is a sinner. And though reconciliation can be a work in progress, forgiveness and choosing to love that person is a decision you can choose to make today. It's a decision you can make today. Matthew 5:43, Jesus says, this is, Sermon on the Mount. You have heard that it was said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. When Jesus says, love your enemies, pray for those who persecute you, they have not repented. They have not stopped hurting them. They have not stopped sinning against them. They're actively hurting them. That's why they're enemies. That's why they're persecuting them. But Jesus says, I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, so that you may be sons of your Father who is in heaven. For he makes his sun rise on the evil and on the good, and sends rain on the just and on the unjust. Verse 46, for if you love those who love you, what reward do you have? Do not even the tax collectors do the same? Very simple words of Jesus. Don't get proud loving those who love you. That's easy. Anybody can do that. But he says, but if you have been loved by God's love, then allow that love to love those who hurt you and disappoint you. And you don't have to wait for them to change. You can make the decision to love, to forgive today, right here and now. And second practical advice I want to give to you is this. Understand that in order to love, it's going to cost you. You're going to need to make sacrifice. And it's the most unfair thing, if you think about it. Well, that person hurt me, that person stole from me, that person ripped my heart out, and in order for me to forgive that person, I have to pay for that. right? I have to pay for that. But that is exactly what God did, isn't it? Right? We hurt God, we offend God, we sin against God. And in order for God to forgive us and to pay for the penalties of our sin, who paid and how? God paid. How? He sent his son Jesus Christ to die on the cross for us. For what? For the sins that we committed. Understand that when you are choosing to love, when you're choosing to forgive, it's going to cost you. Not them. And this is the paradigm shift that needs to happen, because we mean well, we want to reconcile, of course. You don't want enemies, you want friends. You want forgiveness, you want reconciliation, but you're like, but it should not cost me because I already paid dearly. He took my pride, he took my emotions, he took my valuable. Why do I have to pay more? Because that's how God forgave us. That's how God showed and proved his love to us, by paying for our sins. Many times, I think we get stuck here. Like, I'm willing to forgive, Pastor John. I'm willing to work on this relationship. But I really don't want to have to pay for it. They should pay for it. They're the offender. They're the offender. I understand. But see, that's not how economy of God works. That's not how God's grace and act of forgiveness works. It's not the offender who will pay. It is the offended. Because that is love. That is grace. That is forgiveness. And that's what God has done for you and me. You know, Jesus, when he's talking about being his follower, being his disciple, he says, whoever wants to follow me, he must take up his cross daily, deny himself, and follow me. There is a cost to following Jesus Christ. Right? There is a sacrifice that is required in loving. There is a sacrifice that is required in living your life for kingdom purposes. You know, like I have a certain standard of living, right? Like, Hannah buys all my clothes at Costco. You know, that's me, right? I don't dare buy stuff from Banana Republic. That's too high class for me. Like, my boys, you know, they're Uniqlo. You know, like, it's like that's where we are, right? And I have made certain, I think, sacrifices in my life to follow God and to serve God. And if you were to ask me, Pastor Joe, could you have upgraded, like, what you eat, what you wear, what you drive? Certainly. But I have willingly and joyfully made sacrifices so that through those sacrifices, I continue to love, I continue to serve, I continue to honor. You know, one of the biggest heartaches I have is this. As a father, I don't think I have afforded my two boys all the opportunities, the lessons, the experiences they would have wanted to have. Could I have done it? I probably could have done it if I would have compromised in, you know, like giving my tithes and helping the needy, and I could have done it. But see, I understand, as a child of God, it is far greater, far more precious for me to obey God and serve him through my sacrifices than to sacrifice God's calling in order for me to fulfill my desires. Don't have that flipped around, guys. Don't have that flipped around. some of us, we do the opposite. Even if it means to compromise on what God is calling you to do in order to pursue what you want. That's the option you take. But here's the thing. You may achieve that goal by compromising your calling and your obedience. And you can achieve it, but the sad reality is after you achieve it, and I'm not going to tell you, oh, if you do that, God's going to curse you and you can't achieve. No, you will achieve it. You will achieve it. Work hard, you'll achieve it. But see, after achieving it, it's the emptiness you cannot deal with. It's the emptiness that you struggle with. Wow, after sacrificing my intimacy, my obedience, my calling to the Lord, and I finally achieved this. So then you should be happy. You should be at peace. You should be like filled with joy. Why am I so empty? Why am I so empty? And why am I already setting another goal to replace the goal that I just accomplished? Brothers and sisters, when God loved on us, in order to love us, in order to forgive us, in order to reconcile us back to Him, He made a sacrifice. And when John tells us to love one another because love is from God and God is love, he is saying you have received this love and now this love must flow out of you. And you must love in the same manner that God has loved you. And that means your love must be sacrificial. That means your love must cost you. But see, the joy is this. When we truly love, when we love as the Heavenly Father does, we experience and realize that we are indeed from God and that we indeed know God and we experience in every moment of our lives God is with us. God is with us. That is the tremendous blessing and joy that we receive in this loving, intimate relationship. I want us to be a community that grows and matures together. I want us to be a community where we are loving on one another, not because you deserve my love, but even though we don't deserve to be loved, because God has loved on us with such unconditional love, that we seek to love one another, we seek to forgive, we seek to reconcile, and show the grace of God that He has shown to us. Brothers and sisters, I really want us to think about at least two relationships in your life. One within your family and one outside of your family. A relationship that you need to strengthen, restore, rekindle. And if you look at your family, and if you have no relationship that needs to be reconciled or strengthened, God bless you. You are a blessed person. But most of us will have at least one relationship within your family where you feel like, yeah, there's some forgiveness that is needed there. There's some reconciliation that needs to take place. Don't ignore that. But submit yourself to God's will towards that. And at least one relationship outside of your family, whether it's your friends, your co-workers, with neighbors, or some other church members. a relationship that you feel like has kind of drifted apart. You say hi, but it's very awkward. Like when you're shopping at Fairway and then you see the person, right? Duck out of the way. God is in the business of reconciling relationships. As God sought to reconcile our relationship with Him, He wants us to be reconciliators of our relationships. So let's go to the Lord, and just wanted us to kind of respond and pray. Thinking about these two relationships. One within your family, one outside of your family. A relationship that was once precious. A relationship that once perhaps brought you joy. God wants to reconcile, restore, forgive, and heal. Same manner He did to us. God has forgiven us. He has healed us. He has set us free, reconciled us, all at His expense. His expense. He paid for it. Let's go to the Father and say, God, I have this relationship in my family. I have this relationship outside of my family. And I acknowledge that you are bringing these two relationships to my heart right now, because it is your desire to reconcile and redeem those relationships. Lord, I want to obey. I want to love. I want to forgive. I want to reconcile. Let's go to the Lord. Let's pray.